Hello, folks. It's Firm. Fairness in Reporting Media. I'm Mark Merrill. New information. Laurel Libby, per the Supreme Court, has been reinstated to her position representing District 90, Auburn and Maine. And we have some other important legal developments affecting the state of Maine and the federal government. But on May 20th, the Supreme Court ruled 7-2 to restore GOP Representative Laurel Libby's voting status. Now, what that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that she has the ability, or she has now, a restored ability to vote on proposals, legislation that was censured against her by Ryan Fecteau and the Mills administration, including Attorney General Aaron Fry. In a press release dated May 20th, it was a 7-2 vote, as we said, and House Republican leaders praised the presumptive 7-2 ruling, ordering the Maine legislature to count the votes of Laurel Libby of Auburn, who was censured by Democrats for exercising her First Amendment rights on the issue of biological males competing in girls' sports, as I think everybody knows by now. House Republicans expressed their displeasure with the censure in a variety of ways for months, 3 or 4 to be exact, with House Democrats rejecting calls to restore Libby's constitutional rights. But they don't care about constitutional rights because they don't believe in constitutional rights. They believe in their own lawfare. Gee, I think they borrowed that from D.C. Damn deflectocrats in the swamp down there. What's left of them. House Republicans stood united in opposing what we knew was an unconstitutional expulsion, said Ms. Libby, by the Democrats. And now we stand vindicated by the Supreme Court decision to restore my vote in the House. And also supported by Republican leader Billy Bob Buckingham in the same way. In addition to the voices of the girls in our state, House Democrats thought they could also take away the voice of a duly elected female legislator. Kind of ironic and oxymoronic, if you will, isn't it? Hypocrisy breeds insanity, as far as I'm concerned, folks. Unfortunately, though, it takes a ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court to restore constitutional rights and fairness, added Assistant House Republican leader Katrina Smith of Palermo. Also, Ms. Libby went on to say, this is a win for free speech and for the Constitution. She also posted on X, or Twitter, shortly after the decision was announced. The U.S. Supreme Court just restored the voice of 9,000 Mainers, she posted, after 2+ months of being silenced, there you go, for speaking up for Maine girls. I can once again, she said, vote on behalf of the people of House District 90. It's a win for free speech and for the Constitution. Her social media post contained an image of a male high school pole vaulter accepting first place in a girls' competition, you may recall. The post went viral online and ultimately sparked the ongoing fight between Governor Mills and President Trump. Mills refused to budge on Maine's policy, which forces female high school athletes, to this day, to compete against males who say they are female. At the time of this broadcast being recorded, folks, another one in California just competed in 4, I believe, I have that right, competitions in women's sports. Gavin Newsom not uttering a word. You could tell just by looking at this individual's face and his body physique. He's definitely a biological male. But this moves on, folks. The Trump administration is still attempting to withhold federal funding for the state, citing noncompliance of Title IX. Janet Mills wants to keep telling everybody that the Maine Human Rights Act mentions gender identity. Title IX does not. That's right, it doesn't, because Title IX is about biological women for the last 53 years. Doesn't make any sense, folks. Now, on the deflectocrat side, as we call them, leaders led by House Speaker Ryan Fecteau of Biddeford and Representative Matt Moonen of Portland censured Libby over the post. As part of the party line censure vote, Fecteau insisted that Libby's right to vote in House proceedings would only be restored after she issued an apology, which never happened because she refused to apologize and instead filed a lawsuit in federal court. And here we are, folks. In the Supreme Court's decision, 3 guesses and the first 2 don't count. Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson dissented. For more information on this, folks, you can also go to themainewire.com. Congratulations to Ms. Libby and her 9,000 constituents finally getting their voice back. It's about time. Back on April 14th, this was occurring before the Supreme Court decision, folks. Maine's SAD, School Administrative District 70, in Hodgdon, unanimously voted to follow Title IX federal law. And also, Ms. Libby issued a response to her constituents when this was getting on to 2 and possibly 3 months before a decision was made. At the time, she posted, "Thank you to citizens of Amity, Haynesville, Hodgdon," there you go, Linneus, Ludlow, and New Limerick, who spoke up for Maine girls and the board members who voted for a fair, safe, and level playing field and safe places. The people of Maine are making our state great again. I'm so proud of the citizens and school board of SAD 70 for speaking up for our girls. And to continue on, folks, we can't lavish this on and lay it on thick against the Democrats. A person who identifies as the real corn pop, take that, Joe Biden. Augusta did the 6-1 vote last month in support of Title IX, not the Maine Human Rights Act. The capital city of Augusta School Board. Another one called Levacuti said, "Awesome for you, Laurel. Keep fighting and notice what President of El Salvador said in the Oval Office when he was meeting with President Trump. Men and women's sports and violence against women, we would never allow that." And M. Myers posted, "Common sense, fairness, and decency prevails. Thank goodness. Glad Maine School Board cares more about kids than your lousy governor. Just down the street from the Augusta School Board, or maybe across the river, whichever you want to look at it in Augusta. We have an equally lousy governor here in Oregon," posted this M. Myers. "I hope she's paying attention." And one last one, folks. KJ-isms posted, "This is what all Maine school boards should do. It is insanity. Insanity to allow males in female sports only in spaces. Especially that. It's gross. Our Governor Mills needs to follow suit and adhere to Title IX. Maine citizens want females to have separate, fair, and safe competitions." As that continues, folks. Congratulations. Once again, as we say. And all the best to Laurel going forward. In other news or other legal developments, as we said in our title today, folks, about Laurel Libby being having her voice or her vote reinstated. Her voice comes later. There hasn't been anything yet on that. But there's a pattern of negligence, or worse. Maine Republican senators also urge Attorney General Pam Bondi and the Federal Department of Justice to investigate state finances after a devastating audit. I think we've done this one, haven't we, before, folks? But as you see before you here now, more recently on May 15th, Steve Robinson, chief editor of the Maine Wire, interviewed State Auditor Matt Dunlap. You see right here. Oh, there we are. Maine Auditor Matt Dunlap. On Mr. Robinson's report.substack.com, we'll provide that one for you as well in our comments and notes. So here's a few minutes of Q&A with Mr. Dunlap I think you'll find very interesting.
I guess, how would you react to the way it's been received at the State House and by the governor as a taxpayer and as a voter, not as a someone whose name is on the report?
Well, I think there's a lot of education that has to happen there. Again, the standard line has been, this happens all the time, it's every year, this is not a big deal, it's nothing to see.
Which doesn't necessarily, there's a lot of stuff that happens every year.
Sure.
Doesn't necessarily mean that it's not newsworthy and sensational.
Well, one of the things that has come up is that there are more findings in our audits of the Mills administration than there were in the LePage administration, which is true, except they had all the COVID money that hit, and that, because I was Secretary of State when the COVID money hit, and not so much the money, the rules don't change with the money, but the rule book kind of went out the window.
Yeah.
When we were trying to figure out how people could register their cars when the town offices were closed. How do you run a statewide election in the grip of a global pandemic? And in fact, at one point early on, we were talking about having an all absentee ballot election. And Julie Flynn, still the deputy over there, has probably forgotten more about elections than anyone in the country will ever know. She called me and I woke up at 3 in the morning in a panic. She said, who's going to issue the absentee ballots if all the town offices are closed? We don't issue them. The towns issue them. So, that was a lot of challenges to overcome, and sometimes, you had to improvise a little bit. But we've talked about with federal criteria for spending funds. I mean, they don't change their rules very easily, and it's up to them to make the decision whether an adjustment is something they need to worry about or not. It's like I've told everyone in this, our job is to be picky. We're the proofreaders, if you will, because I was a proofreader for 10 years. If you look at all my work experiences, yes, I'm 60 years old. I do have about 75 years worth of work experience, but many times I was working 2 and 3 jobs at a time. So that's how that all adds up. But when I learned how to be a proofreader, the woman who trained me said you have to be very picky. If you're not sure if that should be a semicolon or a comma, you circle it and you ask. That's what we do. It's like, okay, they did a sole source contract kind of after the fact, If we point it out, it's up to the federal clearinghouse to say whether or not they can live with that or not. But if we don't point it out, then we're going to go under peer review this summer. We have to do that every 3 years. We're going to have auditors from Missouri and I think South Carolina in the office going over our processes. And, we had our first one under my watch 3 years ago. It was one of our best ones ever because we have a great crew. But if you do things like look the other way or decide something's not a big deal, your peer review will be really bad. And that affects your ability to continue as an organization. It could force the state to contract out for about 4 or 5 times the cost. So we take our work pretty seriously, and we try to make sure we do a good job and it's of service to the agencies that we work with.
I think there was particular interest in the no-bid contract aspect. Certainly there was for me, having read it and reported on it, because these are instances where inherently there's less accountability when a no-bid contract is assigned. There's no competitive free market process to work to lower the price, so you have no idea how a price was settled upon. And the explanations in some instances really don't pass the straight face test for some of these. So could you talk a little bit about, I guess, what the audit said about no-bid contracts and some of the processes that were involved, or I guess the processes that you guys flagged?
Yeah, review more than anything. Maybe they did a review, but they didn't document it, which is important.
So when you say they, who's supposed to be reviewing?
The chief procurement officer. In fact, there's a number of job descriptions within procurement that have reviewing things like contract proposals and proposals for sole source contracts in their job descriptions. But if they were doing it, they didn't document it, which is, you can't really audit something that's not there. So I have a little experience with this. So going back to the days of my old job, as we were trying to get ranked choice voting off the ground as a voting mechanism, we had a contract with a vendor, Election Systems and Software out of Nebraska. They do all the tabulating machines. And they also had a high-speed tabulator that we could lease where, you go to the polls, you mark your ballot, you put it in the thing, it sucks it in, and then the little dial goes around and says, thank you for voting. The high-speed tabulator can do a whole town in about 5 minutes, so it's a much better piece of technology, very expensive. So it seemed to make sense to us that if we had to write an algorithm to sort for the rankings, that they would do that work. And of course, there was going to be a contract, it was going to be way more than $5,000. And we made a request for a sole source contract with them, and we had to justify that and walk through fire for a couple of weeks before they would say, yeah, okay, you're right, that probably does make sense to have them do it rather than another vendor who's not familiar with their technology.
That's just the tip of the iceberg, folks. It really is. We thank Steve Robinson and also Auditor Matt Dunlap for that information. And now, folks, we get to a little bit more detail. Also, some information coming from the Maine Wire. They're busy people over there. And this has to do with what happened on Janet Mills' watch over these last, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's been almost 8 years before this nightmare is over. Back on May 15th again, most Maine voters backed President Trump in a poll against Janet Mills in the transgender sports spat. Plus, there's lots more poll results gathered during an online and interactive voice response methods. But that was done back between April 22nd to 25th, and it became available on the 15th of May. 52.2% of said Maine should comply with President Trump's executive order to keep biological males out of women's sports. Duh. A new poll reveals a bipartisan majority of Maine voters oppose several progressive education policies supported by Janet Mills' administration and the Democratic-controlled legislature. I don't know about control, but it signaled a potential challenge for their agenda as public sentiment leans toward greater parental control, traditional approaches from K through 12 schools. The survey conducted by SPRY, Spry Strategies, from April 22nd to 25th, polled 500 likely general election voters in Maine using online to mobile and interactive voice response methods. It carries a margin of error of plus or minus 4.4 points, but I think you usually see that in Pew polls or that sort of thing, Gallup, with results weighted to reflect the state's voter demographics more accurately. The poll was commissioned by the parental rights advocacy group Courage is a Habit, focused heavily on education and social issues. And we'll just go through a few of them for you, folks. Thank you for joining us on Firm. If you're tuning in this one late, Laurel Libby has been reinstated as of May 20th from her censure. 7-2 vote by the Supreme Court. And now we're going over some other legal matters and developments that Janet Mills and her cohorts have to deal with. 68% in this poll of responded strongly and somewhat opposed K through 12 health clinics prescribing medications like hormone blockers. Oh, gee, that's a good idea, isn't it? Or providing vaccines to minors without parental consent. I think we just heard about this, didn't we, ladies and gentlemen? It's in the news pretty recently from Robert F. Kennedy Jr., DHHS Secretary. Donald Trump doesn't want it. Elon Musk didn't want it. Neither does Bobby Kennedy, and neither does the rest of the American public. That's the majority, not the minority. Can't wait till LGBTQ, trans, lesbian, gay, the whole 9 yards, folks, queer, whatever. Stop. Stop pushing for equal rights, as one person put it. It's not about special rights. It's about equal rights. No. You go by the law of the Constitution. You don't invent your own lawfare. And that's what we need to stop also with the majority of the radical Democrats, both here and throughout the rest of the United States. Prayers for that person who supported Title IX from Oregon. "67% strongly oppose schools sharing student data with companies and organizations, but only 8% supported it. On the issue of teaching comprehensive sex education that includes topics like masturbation for kindergartners, 69% expressed opposition, 58% strongly opposing. 68% opposed school counselors promoting transgenderism to students, and almost 68% opposed withholding information from parents if a child exhibits gender confusion. Gee, I wonder where they got that idea. Teachers, principals, superintendents, indoctrination through the district higher-ups. Lame brains. Demons. The results show a clear disconnect, writes the Maine Wire. A disconnect between the priorities of Maine voters and the policies being advanced by the Mills administration and Democratic lawmakers. The survey noted that 37.8% of respondents identified as Democrats, 29.2% as Republicans, and 28.4% as independents, folks, indicating a diverse sample. Isn't that nice? On education governance, 59% of respondents supported eliminating federal overreach and returning K-12 education decisions to local parents. 44% strongly supported that shift. Only 31.6% opposed the idea. The poll also highlighted dissatisfaction with the state of K-12 education, with 61% of voters saying it is worse than it was a decade ago, compared to just 15% who believe it has improved. The 2025 findings echo a 2023 poll by the Maine Wire. One final note that's important, folks. Governor Mills' approval rating stood at 51%, with 36% strongly approving and 14% somewhat approving, while 46% disapprove. President Trump's approval was slightly lower, with 46% approving and 52% disapproving of his second-term performance so far, but we're only 4.5 months in, folks. We thank the Maine Wire and extremely, folks, the Supreme Court for their decision to uphold the Constitution. And above all, the First Amendment. I think everybody knows here who's tuned into Firm over the last 2.5 years. That's what we do. We protect the First Amendment. We're a defender. And we're also about truth, facts, reality, and common sense. Keep in touch with us, folks, on all of our programs, over 350 now, on rumble.com/fairnessmedia1, and the others you see up here, YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, and we appreciate your Gmails at fairnessinreportingmedia@gmail.com, fairnessinreportingmedia@gmail.com. Stay safe, everyone. Peace to all.